Welcome back to Jersey Matters. The Supreme Court is expected to rule on congressional redistricting, also called gerrymandering. To talk more about that, Daniel Bowen is the political science professor at the College of New Jersey. A political science professor, I'm sure you're one of many. Right. Let's start with the basics. Congressional redistricting is also called gerrymandering. What is it?
Well, after the census is taken every decade, we have to redraw the maps for our legislative districts, the state level and at the congressional level. When those redrawing is done to benefit one group over another, we use the term gerrymandering.
Where did gerrymandering come from? Do you know?
Right. So there was a Massachusetts governor named Elbridge Gerry, and in 1812, he had a famous legislative district map that looked a little bit like a dragon. There was a political cartoon that drew a dragon on this map. And from then on, we started to call this gerrymandering. Kind of messed up his name a little bit. But
the congressional redistricting is done in all states by the legislature?
In all states, that's right.
And that's why so much money is spent on those races, right?
Right.
Because it means so much. It means congressional seats, and it could mean presidential elections just because of power in Congress. Right. It means bills are going to get through a certain way. And how is it in New Jersey? How does it work in New Jersey?
Okay, so in New Jersey, I should say that there are a few states that have a different process. New Jersey is one of them who adopt a commission in which it's a bipartisan commission for congressional redistricting, and you have 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans are chosen.
Still out of the legislature?
It's a little bit different. Party leaders get to choose their members for a couple of the slots, and but they have Republicans and Democrats, and then a tiebreaker is chosen, someone who is not a member of the other 2 parties and cannot have served public office as an elected party member.
And how does it work? Is it better than most states?
It is better than most states, yeah, because that deciding vote now can check sort of the partisan influences of either of the sides.
Because some states have gotten ridiculous.
Right.
In Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court had to get involved because the Republicans who ran the legislature were going state by state by state by state. But it's not just Republicans. In Democratic states, Democrats do this too.
Right, absolutely.
Which brings us to the 2 cases in front of the Supreme Court. Could you explain them?
Right, sure. So there was a case in Wisconsin, Gill versus Whitford, in which the Republican governor and legislature in Wisconsin was accused of implementing a very dramatic Republican gerrymander. And then the other one was in Maryland, in which the Democratic governor and legislature passed a fairly egregious pro-democratic map. And both these cases have worked their way through the Supreme Court and have been heard. And speculation is that maybe the Supreme Court is going to decide this term about partisan gerrymandering.
And what do you expect to happen? Can you read tea leaves on this at all?
It's notoriously difficult to understand what the court is going to do by the questions they ask. But it sounds like, given the fact that they are hearing a case that was Republican gerrymander and one that's a Democratic gerrymander, that they might be considering imposing some type of a decision on limiting partisan gerrymandering.
Does that overstep their constitutional bounds? I mean, is there anywhere in the Constitution where it talks about redistricting being a federal?
Actually, there's very little. In fact, throughout U.S. history, sometimes members of Congress have been elected from multi-member districts at large throughout the entire state until Congress passed law and said, no, we should have single-member districts for every House race.
Oh, but because Congress did it, that's probably where they're staking their flag and saying we can decide on this because it was a federal ruling.
Right. I mean, there's just a lot that's left out of the Constitution about how the states are going to operate their own elections and choose representatives.
So most states in the country, you've looked at the district maps, right. Most states in the country, are they partisan gerrymandered?
No, I wouldn't say, maps tend to favor the party in power who has control of the redistricting process. But really egregious maps like the ones in Maryland and Pennsylvania and North Carolina, those are usually a handful of states after every given redistricting cycle.
So it sounds like some of these legislators got drunk on their own power,
Right.
that they realized they were able to do it, and so they did it, and now that's why the Supreme Court's getting involved.
Right, I think so.
And so do you think what type of solution can they come up with, though? I mean, if you're going to, it has to be redistricted. There's no question
Right.
it has to be redistricted because
Right.
of the census and because populations change. And they want at least to have the districts as much as they can
Right.
be equal. How do you possibly make that fair?
It's difficult. So there are a couple different measures that you could adopt if the Supreme Court wants to. One is the efficiency gap. That is a new measure that was at the heart of the Wisconsin case. And the efficiency gap says, let's try to count up the number of votes that the majority party loses or wastes, and compare that to the number of votes that the minority party loses or wastes in any given map. And then use that as a standard to try to say, okay, well, if you've lost, if it benefits majority so much, then we're going to draw a firm line in the sand and say that that is unacceptable or unconstitutional. I'm not sure that the Supreme Court is going to make that decision.
That seems flawed too, though,
Right.
because there's some areas that are inherently Democratic, there are some areas that are inherently Republican, and and if you start parsing votes, if you start saying we're going to have this many Republicans and this many Democrats, there's not enough Republicans here, it's going to be mayhem. So I don't understand what standard they could come up with,
Right.
except to say that one's wrong.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like obscenity, right? That's the joke, right? We know it when we see it.
Yeah.
You can know an egregious gerrymander when you see it, but how do you create a standard that it can work in all situations is much more difficult.
And maybe the Supreme Court doesn't even want to do that, right?
Right.
They may not want to come up with a standard. They might just say, we need to come up with a standard. Is that possible?
Right. Or they could say that maps should treat the parties equally. Whether or not, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats elected, but they should be fair maps. And if they can set that goal, right, maybe that would keep the parties in line when they try to draw the maps.
Now, under Barack Obama, across the country, legislators and governors seem to go Republican. So the
Right.
Democrats must be saying, just when we get to take office,
Right.
just when we get to take power, now you're going to take the power of redistricting away from us or gerrymandering away
Right.
from us? The timing's bad for Democrats.
The timing is terrible for Democrats. In fact, many of the states that did gerrymander had Republican gerrymanders because they're the legislatures that were elected after the 2010 Republican wave election.
Yeah, I'm just not positive there's a way. It's going to be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like there's a way to bring partisanship out of the redistricting.
Well, that's a classic problem with redistricting. How do you create fair districts that do the types of things we want to have done with our districts, to represent communities, to protect racial and ethnic minorities, to protect communities of interest, to protect counties or local jurisdictions, and be fair in partisan places.
All right, well, we'll wait to hear what the Supreme Court does. I
That's
appreciate
right.
you coming in and explaining
Larry.
all this. Daniel Bowen, political science professor at the College of New Jersey. When we come back. Still to come on Jersey Matters, people from all over the country order gluten-free cookies from New Jersey. We'll tell you where you can find them when Jersey Matters continues.